So in this video, I want to talk about how I easily, or somewhat easily, find fog as a photographer. If you're familiar with my work, you might have noticed that fog is my favorite element to shoot in, but finding it is not always the easiest thing. So over the years, I've gained some experience and learned how to more accurately predict it and basically how to be at the right place at the right time. We're just going to keep it simple. No need to be a weatherman, no need to have 18 different apps, no need to have professional equipment, just a few apps will do that I'm going to share later. But really, you gotta remember that all you can do is basically show up, and there's always gonna be an element of luck involved. It's part of what makes hunting fog so exciting when you do find it, and also part of the reason why it can be extremely frustrating when the luck just doesn't go your way. And for that reason, if you're actually traveling to a location, you maybe want to consider booking a couple of extra nights just because of the random nature of fog appearing if you're going for photography reasons. Like, for example, recently I went to Venice, and normally I would have stayed in Venice only for 3 days. It's more than enough for regular kind of tourism, but because I wanted to catch the fog, I stayed 5 days, which was enough. And it's pretty common in my travels if I'm going for also fog photography. So first of all, let's go over the kind of science, if you can call it that, of how and where fog forms. Basically, just when temperature drops enough to its dew point. So usually this is during early mornings and late nights during the seasons of autumns and winter. High humidity, 90% or above, typically is good. Kind of depends on the exact terrain. Usually you want calm winds, although a couple of times I've seen fog form during windy nights as well, which is kind of unusual, kind of weird to be honest. But it is possible, just less likely if the winds are high. And typically I've noticed that the night before foggy morning, it's gonna be clear skies. And of course, if you're near water, if you're in the mountains, you have a higher chance of finding fog, especially if you're in like really high mountains. Basically, you can just be inside of a cloud and there's really no difference from fog. Like, for example, in Sapa in Vietnam, half the time you're basically just in a cloud because the village is so high up in the mountains. And actually, you can ask ChatGPT for some locations near you for best possible spots. Now let's get to the apps. My favorite weather app in general has been AccuWeather for the past couple of years. It has really accurate hourly predictions compared to most the weather apps. Not always, it's not 100% accurate, but you kind of also get to learn when the app updates and when you can trust it and when you can't, if you use it a lot. And on those hourly predictions on the AccuWeather app, you go to look at the wind, make sure it's not super windy. Look at the humidity percentage, particularly at like 4, 5, and 6 a.m., like just before sunrise. And then you look at the dew point. So dew point is just what the temperature has to reach in order to fog to form. For example, if you're looking at a hilly area, low winds, humidity at 88% or more, and predicted temperature close to the dew point within like 2 Celsius is a pretty good chance of fog forming. And obviously, the higher the humidity and the closer you get to the dew point, the better the chances, as long as it's not windy. And the next app that I like is Clear Outside. The app is called Clear Outside. Kind of an old app, super simple, but it just has this hourly column. Just remember to go to your actual location, not the home location, which at least on the iOS you can't even change. And then it just gives you a percentage for fog to form. And usually when the parameters on AccuWeather indicate that fog is going to form, I can go to Clear Outside and usually it's going to match. If both of those apps are showing a high chance for fog to form, you can almost guarantee it is going to be foggy unless something drastic changes. But actually oftentimes you're dealing with like a 60% chance, in which case webcams can be a super useful thing to check out. For example, if you're going to a major city, you can just Google a couple of webcams, preferably of the locations that you want to shoot. Commonly, like the most popular areas have a couple of webcams, and if you have a webcam that is like close to water, close to the mountains, instead of actually having to go all the way out, you can just set your alarm for like 5 a.m., check the webcam, see if it looks foggy, and if it doesn't, just go back to sleep. And also, like, if you're actually traveling to a location, I did this, for example, when I was going to Venice, or when I was going to Sapa, when I was going to Kushiro, I had been monitoring those webcams occasionally in advance, and whenever I actually saw the conditions be foggy, I would also go then look at AccuWeather in the real-time weather and see what the humidity was at, what the dew point was at, what the temperature was at, and then I could see how often it was actually accurately predicting fog. And honestly, there's so many more apps you could use, but like I said in the beginning of the video, at a certain point you gotta just show up and hope to get lucky. Eventually you will get lucky. It can get pretty frustrating if you're not getting lucky, because this also involves having to wake up super early, but you know, it's just part of the game. If you love fog, you have to do it. A couple more tips for actually shooting in the fog. Number one is you want to scout the locations before, because often the window of opportunity to actually shoot can be smaller than you might expect. Winds can change and the fog can be very localized, so you really want to know where you're going beforehand, especially if you're doing travel photography. Just scout the locations beforehand. And if you're used to shooting with a ProMist filter, it's actually a little bit overkill if you shoot with a ProMist filter when it's already foggy. You're just gonna get a blurry mess. I tend to remove all my filters when it's actually foggy outside. And finally, you always want to double check your focus, because autofocus tends to become a lot less reliable when it's foggy outside. Anyway, those are all my tips for finding fog, and if you want to actually see me shooting in the fog, you can check some of the vlogs I have on my other channel.